Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Zunaira Ali, and I'm part of the Making Sense International team. Thank you for joining in for this important topic and session with our Youth Lead Ambassador Truman today. Before I hand it over to Truman, I would like to introduce the platform youthlead.org that Truman is leading as an ambassador. Launched in 2018 under the USAID-funded project Youth Power Learning, YouthLead.org is designed for young changemakers who are making a positive impact in their community through service, activism, advocacy, education, and entrepreneurship. The YouthLead Ambassador Program is an 18-month professional development and leadership opportunity for young changemakers who have a proven record in mobilizing other people to have a positive impact in their community. One such youth lead ambassador is Truman, and he will be talking about equipping entrepreneurs with the tools and resources so they can emerge out of poverty. Over to you, Truman.
Thank you so much, Zunaira, for the introduction and just introducing what Youth Lead is all about. Like she said, my name is Truman Mabumbo, and I'm from Zimbabwe, and I've been a Youth Lead ambassador for the past few months. And as part of my duties as an ambassador, I was tasked with talking on a project that I really feel like really needs a lot of light in. And I then settled on this topic where I'm essentially touching on how can we equip entrepreneurs with tools and resources that can help the communities in which they come from to actually emerge from poverty. So here's an outline of what the presentation is going to look like. I'm going to begin with an introduction to social entrepreneurship. What exactly do we mean by social entrepreneurship? And in the context of this discussion, why are we even talking about it? And then we're going to tackle the status quo, looking at the reality of the traditional system of charity and aid. What are some of the pros, some of the cons, and why should we remodel that scenario where we have a lot of people who are doing charity and aid? How can we make it more effective and implementing that within the social entrepreneurship model that I am going to be suggesting in this presentation? From there, I'm going to introduce one of the key aspects or components of design thinking, which is empathizing. So how can we take all the resources that we have and use them to create something that is community-centered? So that is going to be also a critical part of this discussion or this webinar. Then from there, I'm going to give a couple of case studies, people who've done or who are doing all these things that I'm going to be suggesting in my presentation. And then from there, touch on maybe the impact and sustainability of such kind of actions. And if we go that route of, empathizing and using design thinking to create community-centered interventions, what kind of impact and sustainability would we be looking at? And then from there, the call to action, because to a large extent, this webinar is going to be theoretical. It's going to be me telling you about all the research that I've done, all the things that I've seen, particularly in Zimbabwe, although it can be scaled to the global sense, as you're going to see. What then after that can you do as an individual or as an organization to then implement all these things to create positive change, to create impactful programs for communities? Now, these are some of the working definitions of some of the things that I'm going to mention in my presentation. So the first one is social entrepreneurship. And for the purposes of this webinar, social entrepreneurship is essentially a process through which individuals and organizations or even entrepreneurs develop and they fund solutions that directly address social issues. And then I'm also going to mention philanthropy under the traditional means of charity and aid, where philanthropy just refers to charitable acts or other good works that normally just help people and the community as a whole. So it can include things like donating money to a worthy cause or volunteering time, effort, or any other form of altruism. One of the other important things as well that I'm going to mention is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is it's a psychological theory that describes the needs that human beings have. So it's a pyramid where each section in the pyramid describes some of the needs that human beings need, and these are hierarchical, which means that at the base is something. So those needs, your safety needs, your physiological needs, and then from there it progresses. So I'm going to mention a bit about it when I'm talking about some of the needs that underserved communities have. Now, what exactly is social entrepreneurship and why? This brings me to why exactly I decided to speak on this particular topic. And coming from Zimbabwe, you'd notice that a lot of communities are really impoverished. They're really underserved. A lot of those communities are in really dire conditions where poverty is really stricken. And what I realized was that a lot of people who are looking into creating impact within those communities are going in there with resources. They're going in there with money, and they already have the solutions or the intervention approach that they want to take in helping those communities. So I might want to help a community with employment, and I'm going in there with an idea of, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to create a company. I want to create a cooperative. I want to create a project, all these things. But there isn't really an inherent and intentional method by which these individuals are getting into communities and actually listening to what exactly the community needs. And as you're going to realize in the rest of my webinar, is that a lot of the interventions that we have aren't really creating sustainable impact, in that once we get into these communities and we give them the resources that we have, we're not making it in such a way that the model that we're using can be replicated, and the society in itself is able to use that to then go forward in, for example, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're doing it in such a way that the community is still dependent on us making the intervention. So why are we talking about social entrepreneurship in that regard? I believe that social entrepreneurship can be a tool in which we can use in order to empower the communities, to empower the people within underserved communities to take charge of their own lives and, in a sense, create sustainable impact, whereby they're able to actually use the resources that you bring in and actually build something that can then help and have a net positive impact on their communities. So that is a bit about why we're talking about this. But to give you a bit of context in terms of numbers, in 2021, the World Bank reported that over 60% of Zimbabweans fell below the poverty datum line. And of course, this was induced by COVID. But since then, the number hasn't really reduced. Out of the 16 million people who are in Zimbabwe, who live in Zimbabwe, over 6.2 million of them are living under the poverty line. That's over 40% of the people in Zimbabwe that are living under the poverty line, which means that they are struggling to make ends meet. And like within the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're still at the base of the pyramid, where they're still fighting for their physiological needs. But this is not just a problem that people in Zimbabwe are facing. Poverty is a global problem, as we can all attest. Now, the stats do say that 9.2% of the world lives in extreme poverty. That translates to over 720 million people right across the world who are in poverty, who are impoverished, who are in underserved communities. So this is really a problem that is at a global scale. How can we look at it in such a way that we're thinking of solutions, we're thinking of ways to make interventions that actually help the people within these communities that are impoverished to actually escape that poverty or to emerge out of poverty? And in the same light, how can we make it in such a way that as they emerge out of poverty, we've empowered them in such a way that they are able to actually tag along all the other members of their community? They're able to create a net positive impact across the whole space. Now, there are people who've tried to make interventions. There are organizations that have tried to make an impact within the space. Now, if we look at the current status quo, how are people doing charity? How are people aiding people? And you'd realize that a lot of the times it's not community centered. There's a story about an organization in Zimbabwe that had a couple of resources. They had money and they wanted to make an impact. So they thought to themselves, hey, let's go to this community, right? Let's go into these communities. Let's find something that we can do for these people, because we know that poverty is one of the biggest problems in the world. Now, they went into a community, and when they got into the community, they saw all the school children in the community were going to school barefooted. They didn't have any shoes whatsoever. So they thought to themselves, this is a really big problem. These children are not going to school with shoes, and they had to walk long distances in very harsh weather conditions. Sometimes it'll be raining, sometimes it'll be extremely hot. So they thought to themselves, we need to do something. This is a really big problem. And what they did was they went back to their offices and they thought to themselves, hey, let's buy each and every child in that village a pair of shoes. They went back, they bought the shoes. Then they went back to the community. They gave each and every child a pair of shoes. Problem solved. They went back. When they came back a year later, they realized the children still weren't wearing any shoes. In fact, they just put the shoes on the side and they were completely fine with walking to school with their bare feet. Now, of course, they were puzzled, they were baffled. What's going on? So they went and asked the elders in the community, why are the children not wearing the shoes? And what the elders told them is essentially or fundamentally what I'm coming to talk about in this webinar. The elders told them that had you really come to ask, what are some of the problems that you're facing, or what's the biggest problem that you're facing, we would not have told you that it's our children not wearing shoes. If anything, they don't even know what shoes are. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing is water. So if you used all that money that you used to buy shoes to actually drill a borehole, that would have had a positive impact on us as a community, because that is exactly what we need. And that story kind of highlights the landscape of aid and charity right now, where people are just thinking in their houses and their offices, they're thinking we need to make an impact. How can we do that? And they're just thinking, let's buy something. Let's buy them groceries. Let's buy them shoes. But is it really what the people need? Of course, in some instances, these targeted campaigns or charitable acts do solve a need. But one of the major problems that they have is that they provide short-term solutions. So in the case of shoes, assuming that the kids actually needed the shoes, what was going to happen after a year when maybe the shoes were worn, were torn, and they couldn't wear them anymore? They'll still look at that organization to come back with another set or another pair of shoes for each and every child. So it creates short-term solutions that are not really that sustainable. Now, we look at this and we're asking, so what exactly is the way to go about making impact or creating impact within underserved communities? And one of the fundamental things that I talked about when you are creating a solution for a particular problem through following the design thinking approach is empathizing. So how can you put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're trying to, help? And how can you then allow the input that you get from them to advise the kind of steps that you then take to create the solutions? So in essence, how can we put the community at the center of our interventions and programs? It's important to get into these communities, not on a high horse saying we have all the money, we have all the resources, we're here to create impact, we're here to help you out because we know you're in need. How do we actually identify the needs of the community? It's really important to get into these communities and engage the community, not in such a way of saying, we're coming in, we have a lot of money, I'm an individual doing some philanthropy work, or I'm part of an organization that's trying to eradicate poverty, and we're here to give you money, to give you shoes, to give you groceries. How do you get into communities and break the ice? How do you create a rapport in such a way that you're actually creating relationships with that same community in order to solve any of the problems that they need? So some of the insights that you're going to gain that communities have various type of needs, and due to cultural differences and socioeconomic differences, each and every community that you meet or that you go to will have different needs. And some of the insights, like I said, that you're going to get are that communities fundamentally need three things. Of course, there are more things that they need, but they can be broadly categorized into these three groups. So one is they need resources. Now, I keep on mentioning that the traditional method of aid or the traditional charity scenario is mainly based on short-term solutions. So within resources, communities are looking for resources that they can use in order to actually participate in the economy and create opportunities for themselves fully. I'm going to give an example in one of the case studies of someone who is giving resources to communities in such a way that the community is able to actually use those same resources to build something that can create impact and sustainable change within the community. So that's definitely one. Communities need resources. This might be money, this might be assets, this might be capital, or it might be access to markets if these communities are into production. Now, the second and probably one of the most important is empowerment. So communities need to be empowered. One of the major problems in underserved communities is that people within these communities do not believe that they have the power to actually create opportunities for themselves, and not just for themselves, but for the people around them. So part of empowerment should include spearheading a paradigm shift, whereby we are changing the narrative within these underserved communities that, they're able, like with resources and with all the human capital that they already have and all the intellectual capacity or the wisdom that they have all the resources and the tools that they need to actually emerge from poverty. So empowerment is really crucial and critical. And the third is knowledge. In Zimbabwe particularly, but I'm pretty sure we can scale it up to the global landscape. Knowledge is still bottlenecked. It's people within privileged positions who have access to knowledge. So it's people who are going to school. It's people who have the opportunity to go to university, people who have the opportunity to interact with other people and actually share ideas, share information. So one of the major things that we need to tackle in this whole fight against poverty is knowledge. How can we deliver knowledge to these same communities to then work with all the other resources that are provided and all this empowerment to then create impact within that community. So it's extremely important for organizations and for individuals to invest in aspects like mentorship and knowledge sharing platforms that can then help create that platform to share knowledge between people who have the knowledge or expertise in particular areas with the people within the community. In one of the case studies as well, you're going to see how one organization is intentionally making it a point to share knowledge that can help the community to actually emerge from poverty and solve one of the most important challenges that they're facing in the community. Now, people in desperate circumstances, they unfortunately don't have the luxury to choose. As the saying goes, beggars aren't choosers. And it means that when you get into these underserved communities and you have something to give them, they have no option but to accept it, even though it might not necessarily be the one thing that they actually need. But perhaps now is the time to rethink that model and look at how we can adopt a community-centered approach to equipping these communities with relevant resources. Because if we continue with the current model, we only exacerbate dependence. Like the example that I gave of the organization that bought shoes. It's only a short-term solution. And it's not really creating independence. It's not giving the community the power to actually use those same resources to create more for the people within the community, and to also then help them to emerge from poverty. So it is important that we learn to teach the man to fish and not just give the man a fish. So these are some of the organizations that are doing something within underserved communities. And you see that here I just have 3 organizations. I have Chingitai Foundation, I have an individual, Mohammed Yunus from Bangladesh, and I also have Hibiscus Dotage Foundation. These are 3 different entities, and they are operating in 3 different spaces. Chingitai Foundation is operating in the knowledge space, where they are more about, imparting knowledge. They're more about sharing knowledge and expertise on how a community can help itself. Mohammed is more of resources. He is giving resources to his community. And at the end of the day, he's actually able to impact change through the resources that he gives. And then Hibiscus Dotage Foundation is in the empowerment space, where they've innovated and found a way to engage young people within underserved communities to actually do something. So with Chingitai Foundation, one of the major problems that girls have in Zimbabwe and even all around the world, especially in underserved communities, is access to safe sanitary wear. So reports suggest that 72% of girls in Zimbabwe do not have access to pads, and they then have to resort to using things like cow dung, rags, or any other resource that they can find. And this has adverse effects. It affects even their schoolwork, because some of them have to miss up to 40 days of school each and every year. An average pack of 10 sanitary pads costs around $3 to $7. And that's quite expensive, especially in underserved communities where a lot of the people are living under the poverty line. And this is one of the biggest problems that, underserved communities, especially women and girls, are facing. And we can take a look back. We can look back in my presentation to where I was talking about the traditional way of aid, the traditional way of charity. A lot of organizations have identified this problem. They've realized, oh, there's this problem. A lot of girls are missing school. A lot of girls are facing a lot of stigma because they do not have, access to pads. So what can we do? So in the traditional sense, what they've done is they've gone to people and said, we're taking donations for pads. They've collected money from individuals who are looking to, help. They've collected money from organizations. They've used all of this money to then buy sanitary pads. They go into these communities, they give girls these sanitary pads. As you can imagine, it's an intervention. It's a welcome intervention, because this is a really significant problem. However, it's a short-term solution, because at the end of the day, if you're able to provide pads, maybe 10 or 15 to each and every girl, at some point they're going to get finished. And when they're finished, they're still going to need more of them, and that creates dependence. So Chingitai Foundation thought about this, and they thought, hey, how can we remodel this in such a way that we create a sustainable solution that can help make impact within communities? And what they do is, it's a very interesting model. They get into these communities, these underserved communities, and they teach the women and the girls in those communities how to make reusable sanitary pads using the resources that they have available. And these reusable pads subsidize the cost of, the average conventional pads, and they can be used between 8 to 18 months. And it doesn't just end there. What they do is they empower these women, and they give them the knowledge of how to make reusable pads. And these women, in turn, with the skills that they get of how to make reusable pads, they start to make them on a commercial basis. They make a lot of them, and they're actually able to then sell to other people within the community, of course, at a subsidized price. So that's just an example of how knowledge that is really community-centered and that's looking to make a sustainable impact in a community is really crucial. Because had Chingitai Foundation just decided we want to make an impact, let's use the traditional model where we go and have pet drives, we get people to donate, and then we go into these communities and, give donations, they would have made an impact, but it would have been a fraction of the kind of impact that they have now, because what they've done now is to create independence within these communities. Women are now empowered. They now have the knowledge to solve one of the most significant problems that they are facing in the community. Now, moving on to Hibiscus Foundation. This is one of the only organizations that I know in Zimbabwe whose sole purpose is to address the challenges that elderly people within the community face. One of the most significant problems within the underserved communities is that the elderly people tend to be neglected as well, because the young people are focused on how can we make our lives better. They're looking to move to urban areas. They're looking to, better their lives. And in the process, the elderly people are left behind with no one to care for them. And one of my friends discovered this as a problem and decided that, we might not necessarily have all the resources. We might not have all the money in the world to make an impact. But what we can do is we can volunteer our time to actually listen to all the needs that the elderly people have, and then do all the work that needs to be done based on the needs that they do say they have. And so Hibiscus Foundation is just a trust that was founded by young people. And right now they have volunteers. They have over 400 volunteers of young people in Zimbabwe, right across the country, who have dedicated their time to actually go into communities and look at the needs of the elderly people. So some of them might just need time. They might just need attention. They might just need someone to talk to. And these young people are going into these communities and thinking, how can we, solve that? How can we provide what they need? And in some instances, they do need groceries. They do need money for some things. And they've established projects within those communities to actually create a sustainable model around how can we provide the elders who need help with groceries, who need help with some money, to provide that. So one of the ways that they're doing that is through cooperatives, through projects that are really community-centered and that engage young people within those communities. And part of what they're doing as well is that empowerment and knowledge sharing, where they're going to the young people and highlighting that, this is a need that's there. What can you do about it? How can you participate? And in a sense, they're following this model that I'm going to give in my conclusion of. They're empathizing. And from empathizing, they're engaging. By engaging stakeholders, they're engaging the elderly people, they're engaging the young people as well, to create that model where they're able to actually act and make an impact. So that's their website. In case you want to check them out, you can always see the work that they're doing and their vision and the mission that they're on. And the last case study is of Mohammed Yunus. Mohammed Yunus is he's a social entrepreneur from Bangladesh, and his story is quite inspirational. What he did was he got into the social entrepreneurship space by chance. So he was looking at making impact, and he was looking at underserved communities, because a lot of people in Bangladesh at the time, or even now, are really impoverished, and they're looking for ways to emerge from poverty. And what he did was he thought to himself, I can't just hand out money. I can't just bring money from my wallet and say, oh, here's $100 or here's $20, use it for whatever you need in your life. And then, I go my way, which is what a lot of people do, which is commendable. But he thought to himself, that's not enough, right? I can do more than that. And at the time he started all of this, he just had $27 in his pocket. And what he did was he found a group of women and he gave them that $27, but not as a donation. He gave it to them as a loan, because he thought to himself, and from what he was hearing from the women, they just need money to start on an idea or the ideas that they had. So he gave them the money. He gave them $27 as a loan. And then from there, he actually realized that, in cases like in underserved communities, in some cases, what they actually do need is just a push, maybe just a little bit of resources to help them to actually to help them to actually start something, to start an idea, to start an initiative that can then help themselves to emerge from poverty. And since then, he founded the Grameen Bank, which has dispersed over $27 billion in microloans to over 9 million borrowers in Bangladesh. And he established this with a clear idea of what the problem and what the needs of the community were. So one of the major problems being in an underserved community was that the people could not get your traditional loans at the bank because they could not meet some of the criteria. Maybe they did not have collateral. And so he made or established this bank that gave out microloans with limited criteria. So it was entirely based on trust, because at the end of the day, he could give money out and someone could say, you know, I don't have the money anymore, and that's it. There's no way to then get it back. But surprisingly, that model actually had high repayment rates of over 95%. That's even better than some banks. So his story really highlights one of the most important things in my presentation, in that he identified a need within the community. And when he identified that need, he realized that this was a way that he could go about, you know, providing that. Of course, maybe the impact that he had was not 100%. Maybe it's not everyone who took the money that emerged from poverty. But at the end of the day, what he did and the steps that he took created this net positive impact for the communities that were impacted. And his story acts as a guide or acts as inspiration for a lot of other individuals and organizations who are out there and looking to make impact, to say, you know, you don't really need to have all the money in the world. You don't really need to have all the resources in the world. It's just about identifying a need, really considering what the need is, and doing what you can or however you can to actually then help. And it goes to the main idea of this whole presentation, that how can we equip people within these underserved communities with tools and resources that help them to emerge from poverty through creating initiatives that create, you know, sustainable impact. And these don't necessarily have to be entrepreneurs. I know the title of the webinar is how can we equip entrepreneurs? But entrepreneurs in this context just means enterprising individuals. So this might be women, this might be men, this might be girls or boys within these communities that have ideas of, you know, how can I start something that can help other people? How can I do this in order to create this? So at the end of the day, we really have to think intentionally about what can we do? What do we have? But all of these will not matter if we do not make it community-centered. That is, truly empathizing and understanding the needs that these people within underserved communities have and some of the challenges that they're facing. And in a nutshell, this is the process that I would suggest for individuals and organizations to follow anytime that they want to have a community intervention, anytime that they want to do philanthropy, anytime that they want to do some form of aid. The first and probably most important step is to empathize. Really understand the people that you're trying to help. Really get into their shoes and, you know, think about what are some of the problems that they're facing. Part of empathizing is then also doing your ethnographic research, that is engaging them, breaking the ice, hearing from them, from the horse's mouth, you know, what exactly do you need? And in my position, what can I do for you? So breaking the ice also includes having a relationship with the community that you're trying to impact. Because at the end of the day, when you look at some of the traditional ways of, you know, getting into communities or having initiatives that are meant to help communities, it's just, there's a disconnect. There isn't an intentional way through which individuals and organizations trying to make an impact actually get into these communities to create relationships. Because at the end of the day, it's really truly about relationships. Once you get into a community, you create a rapport and you get into the space where there's a relationship, you are gaining something, they're gaining something, and you're then at a better position or in a better position to actually help them. From there, it's then about understanding their position, understanding their needs, and understanding what you can do based on the resources that you have, the knowledge that you have, and all the other connections that you have. Understand how you can use them to then help them, to meet them at their point of need. Because at the end of the day, you might understand the needs, and then there might be a disconnect with what you actually have. So you need to understand how you can use your resources to then channel them towards meeting them at their need. It's just like Mohammed Yunus, who identified that, microloans could have a very big impact in these communities, because sometimes what they just need is a little push, it's a little help to help them start their initiatives. So at the end of the day, really understand, what do you have, what do they need, how can you connect them together to then make this whole big thing. Then from there, it's definitely acting. Once you understand that this is what I have, this is what I can do, and this is how I can go about it, you've engaged the people, you've broken the ice, you've created a rapport, and you have everything in order, then act. Just like with Hibiscus Dottage Foundation, where they identified a need, they identified a problem, they identified that what they had was time, what they had was a lot of other young people who are looking to make an impact within their communities, who are looking to volunteer their time into meaningful things. They realized that they had all of that, and they then leveraged all of that to meet the elderly people within communities in Zimbabwe at their point of need. So it's extremely important to then act on all these other intentional steps that you'd have taken. You empathized, you engaged, you understood. Now the action part. Now, once you create that intervention and you're acting, it's also extremely important to then monitor that change. So with a lot of interventions, right, it's extremely important to then quantify and qualify the impact that you're making, because that then helps you and it helps advise your next steps. Like within the design thinking process for entrepreneurs, one of the important components that you're taught, or one of the important qualities of design thinking that you're taught, is that it's iterative. So you might empathize, engage, understand, act, and then come to monitoring, you realize that this is not really having, the impact that you thought it was going to have. You can still then go back and really iterate and engage still to then find out, the perfect solution. And then, so that's really the importance of monitoring. A lot of the traditional ways of doing charity and aid, especially for individuals, is you just do something and then you go out there, you provide what you think is a solution to a problem, and then you go back, that's it. So it's also important to then have all these key performance indicators, have all these ways to then qualify and quantify the progress that you're making with your intervention. And that then advise you on the steps forward. And even beyond that, it helps you inspire other people as well to actually do the same. But the main or fundamental message that I have in this presentation is that in any intervention that we have, or that we're looking to provide, or in any solution that we're looking to provide for underserved communities to help them emerge from poverty, we have to truly understand that at the core, or fundamentally, it's about them, it's about the community. So it's important for any intervention or solution to come from what they say and think and feel to be their most important need. Now, you can narrow it down to any sector. So you don't have to get into communities and thinking, oh, we can make an intervention in the education space or healthcare or agriculture or any other sector based on what they say. You could get into a community with an idea that we want to do something within the healthcare space. Maybe there's a problem within a community that they do not have access to doctors, or they do not have access to specialists, and you're getting into that community with that narrowed focus. That's completely fine, as long as within engaging, or with the whole engaging and breaking the ice with the community, you truly understand that within that sector that you've chosen, what exactly is the pain point, and then you act on that. So that is really what my presentation was on. How can we remodel the traditional method of aid and charity, and how can we use the same resources in a more impactful and in a more intentional way that allows the people within the community to create more impact, to create something that is bigger than themselves, that then helps all the other people in the community as well. So I really hope that it's something that you then think about if it's an individual and you're looking to make an impact in your community or any other community. It's really important to then really think about, how can I teach them how to fish? How can I provide them with the tools that allow them to fish instead of just giving them the fish? Thank you. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Truman. And it was a wonderful presentation, especially from the perspective of driving community change, because as you said, it comes from every person's individual capacity, and there is no one solution fits all. So that was really, really important and helpful. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us. If anyone has questions or suggestions for Truman at this point, we'll take questions. You can type in chat or you can just come off mute and ask away. Truman, Johan is asking, first, thank you for sharing this methodology. Have you tested already in your organization or programs?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Johan. I think for me, as a person who's come from a background of, design thinking, because I've been in institutions where we've been taught, design thinking, that, you have to empathize. Any intervention or any solution that you make has to be human-centered, has to be user-centric. So in all my initiatives, I've really gotten into a space where I start by asking the people within the people within the community or within the space that I'm trying to make a solution for, what they actually need. However, it's also important to note that in some instances, they might not really have the solution. So what they might have is a need, and they understand that this is a need that we have. So I started an organization called Zimbabwe, where we essentially distribute academic resources to students via WhatsApp, which is a cheaper and more affordable and accessible way for online learning for students in Zimbabwe. And when you do research on that, you might realize that, these young people understand that they have a need, and that need is they need resources. They need access to past papers, notes, mark schemes, and all of that. But they might not necessarily have an idea of what a solution could look like for them. So yes, I do use, and I've tested this method of, having a community-centered intervention. But it's important to take it with a grain of salt that, it's important to establish the need. And then with the solution, of course, there's need to engage with the community when creating that solution. But it's not always that the community actually knows exactly what solution that they need. But yes, it's important to validate a need. I hope that answers you.
Thank you, Truman. Then we have some comments. And please feel free to drop in your information if you want to stay connected or have more questions or would like to collaborate in the future. That's always an option. Truman, could you please drop in your email in the chat so people can contact you?
Definitely.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or thoughts on the presentation? All right, so if there are no more questions, thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you again, Truman, for sharing all this information with us. Truman has dropped his information in the chat. So if you want to stay connected, please reach out through these channels. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.